Mitchell has his head up, takes the feet. Oh, my! Donovan!
Get that weak stuff out of here!
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod, hosted by Tony Pesta, Jackson Flickinger, and Corey Walsh. Today, we have a rough one. The Cavs embarrassingly dropped the ball to a depleted New York Knicks team. The Cavs themselves were dealing with numerous injuries, but this was the type of loss that sent Cavs Twitter into a spiral. And that kind of happens in every loss, but this wasn't the usual frenzy. This one triggered some PTSD from last year's playoffs, and even I couldn't overlook this probably being the worst loss of the season, one of the few that I would consider genuinely troubling. So I think it would be fitting for us to start off with our concern level for this team. Jackson, Corey, which Defcon level are we on with the Cavs? Defcon 1 is the worst. Defcon 5 is the best.
I'm at 1. I think that's pretty...
So it's doomsday.
Yeah, I mean, this is...
Nuclear warfare is right around the corner, is what you're saying.
The Cavaliers, if you listen to them talk, this whole season they've been talking about everything that they've done to change who they are so that this wouldn't happen again to them in the playoffs, specifically to a team like the Knicks. And I know Donovan Mitchell wasn't there. That changes everything. But the Knicks were without 4 starters and their best player for, basically the whole game. And nothing changed at all. If you didn't know any better, you would have thought this was game 6 of the 2023 first round, and it went just like 4 of the other 5 games went. The Knicks, I guess it didn't go because they didn't really beat the Cavs up on the boards, but they beat the Cavs up in other ways. The Cavs spacing was cramped when they were running the 2 big lineups. They weren't getting the advantages of having a 2 big lineup. Everything just seemed like, all right, we've tried to address these problems, and hey, they're still there. So, I mean, if they're all still there, what have the Cavs actually accomplished this season that would make you believe that, the next time they get into a playoff series, things would actually go differently?
Yeah, I think stylistically, maybe that's not the right word. I think you'll get what I'm trying to say, though. The way they lost to the Knicks last year is they got pummeled on the boards, they turned the ball over a bunch, and they just couldn't score. The only one of those factors that really showed itself in this game was they just couldn't score. They took pretty decent care of the ball, if I remember. They didn't turn it over a bunch, and they did lose the rebounding battle, but they didn't get crushed. I know Josh Hart had a whole bunch, but they were all defensive, and it wasn't really like they were losing because they couldn't grab a board. They were losing for different reasons, but the one thing that remained was that they just got punked. I mean, it looked like they were being outworked. Usually, I would say 90% of the discourse when people say, oh, one team's soft or the other team just wants it more, it's kind of just ridiculous. It's kind of just fluff. But with this Knicks team, I don't know. I think the Cavs just don't have enough animosity towards the Knicks as the fans do, for sure. It seems like that fire that you want, and this is what's reminiscent of that playoff series, is when their back was against the wall in game 5, they came out pretty flat. It never felt like this Cavs team was really revved up for the playoffs. And against this Knicks team, we'll talk a little bit more about the actual roster that was out there for the Knicks, but it was more of the same to me. Corey, how are you feeling? What DEFCON level are you at?
I'm probably at a 2, I would say, because it's the whole Knicks thing too, to keep in mind, is the team that they just lost to yesterday wasn't even remotely close to the team they lost to in the postseason. More than half the players weren't even on the team last season, but it literally felt like it just picked up right where it left off. So it's just Thibodeau knew exactly how to attack the Cavs and just did it with a different cast and crew. And that's problematic because then it's not a player problem. It's they're attacking your scheme and you're just refusing to fix it. You would think that at some point there would have been some adjustments overall in the lineups, but it felt like we kind of were attacking the same way we have in this post All-Star break stretch. And I didn't really see anything differently for looks for how JB was handling it. I mean, I feel like when Brunson got hurt originally, obviously injuries stink, but then I feel like that was kind of worst case scenario because then the Cavs didn't even know what they were going up against offensively either. And it was evident that they just couldn't figure out who was going to be the guy to beat them on a given possession. And it really just, as ESPN or just Doris Burke, because apparently only Doris Burke did the broadcast last night, highlighted, it was a team effort just to beat the Cavs. And we couldn't even replicate that team effort on the way back. It felt like no one could take the reins, which is what the Donovan Mitchell-less Cavs have been pretty much all season.
Yeah, I think it's also worth pointing out that I feel like teams get disheartened, and I feel like teams also get energized when they have a game plan and like a strategy that they believe in and they know that works. And I feel like that's what you see every time that the Knicks play the Cavs is like, hey, we know how to beat these guys. It doesn't matter what 5 guys are wearing Knicks jerseys because we know what we're going to do. We're going to make Allen and Mobley make quick decisions in the short roll. We're going to make, we're going to pressure Garland and Mitchell. We're going to make them keep them from driving inside the paint, keep them from doing what they're comfortable doing. And then the Cavs on the other hand they're better in their process, I feel like. I think we saw like Isaac Okoro was a great example of this where he doesn't have those record scratch moments. He's always really assertive now when he's attacking, and he's been great, and he was great last night. But still, like, overall as a team, it just feels like they don't know what to do in these moments, and that's really troubling because this is all that they've thought about since, last April. Every time Donovan Mitchell talks post-game, he always talks about this is just a regular season game. We still have to prove it in the playoffs. He's talked about the Knicks series multiple times. He's brought it up in games that they're not playing the Knicks. Like, it's something that's always on his mind. And I know he wasn't out there, but like, that's on this team's mind. And they came out and they showed that as much things have changed, they really haven't changed.
Yeah, and to that point, so I would say I'm probably at Defcon 2, maybe 3, anywhere in that range. And to everything that you said, I just want to add on to it. And I want to be very clear that this is not any excuse. I'm not excusing the way the Cavs played. It's the worst loss of the season. They absolutely need to be better. The energy needs to be higher. Like I said, there needs to be more animosity towards the team that just kicked their ass in the playoffs. But to that point, injury games are weird. Both teams were dealing with some weird injuries. This was not the full strength version of either team. I think for the Cavs, it's really easy. Like, I just look at it from a fan perspective of like, I was super hyped up to see the Knicks and Cavs play each other again at any point in the regular season. And so far we like just haven't seen it happen. They haven't been healthy in any of their matchups. And so if as a fan, that's kind of deflating me, I would imagine as a player, you're getting revved up to rematch the Knicks, and then the only guy out there who was in that playoff series last year was Josh Hart and Hartenstein, I believe, because Brunson goes down right away too. And then I'm sure most of their game plan was centered around Jalen Brunson. Then he goes out right away. So it's kind of this weird thing where the Cavs themselves talked about that kind of deflated them a little bit, which again, not an excuse. That's not something that you should allow to happen. But then on the other hand, the Knicks use that as a rallying point. And so I think if I'm trying to find any optimistic angle, it's that maybe in a playoff series when both teams are healthy, you would hope that the Cavs would come out a little more fired up and those injuries won't make it as weird. But nonetheless, it's obviously just a very bad loss for this Cavs team, and one that they shouldn't feel happy about. Everyone on the team should be pissed off again, all over again.
A reason to kind of... Oh, no, you go, Jackson.
No. Go for it, Corey, because I'll just keep talking.
I feel like I'm pessimistic about this series in general because even though it's been kind of injury riddled on both sides throughout the series, I feel like the Cavs for the most part have been the healthier team through that series. And you would think with health would be more continuity. And it doesn't matter what crew the Knicks are throwing out there. The roster in general has had so much turnover in this season alone. And it doesn't matter what players Thibodeau throws out. They play almost identically, and they still find ways to beat the Cavs. And the Cavs have pretty much the same roster going out every night, and they can't find ways to beat this scheme whatsoever. So it's disheartening, and we're trying to like when Mitchell's not on the lineup, I feel like pretty much the general fan perspective is, well, this will be a good opportunity to see how Garland handles life without Mitchell. Maybe we'll see 2021, 2022 Garland again. And I don't think we have seen cases where that's really showing up whatsoever. And you're kind of getting like double negatives from those games. Then you're seeing that there hasn't been growth since that Knicks series, despite the unhealthy Knicks. And you're not seeing Garland take advantage of the Knicks skeleton crew as well.
I have nothing to add. Corey was right on everything. What a rare occurrence.
Huzzah!
Yeah, that was a really good point. The fact that the Knicks have been changing their personnel and still the blueprint has remained the same. I think the one other, of course, I'm being the optimist as always, but I think the one good thing is that despite all of this, they could have won this game. They were still in a position to win, and it's kind of how you felt about a lot of those playoff games too, where it's like they played so bad and somehow they still, aside from that one game where they got blown out, they were still in position to win. So, hey, maybe Donovan Mitchell changes it, maybe he doesn't. What I think we all want changed, we are not the only ones saying this. JB's got to figure out the rotations. He's got to figure out who belongs on the floor each night. As much as the formula to beat the Cavs didn't change, it certainly doesn't help that George Niang and our beloved Dean Wade also had a pretty disastrous performance. But let's talk about these rotations because it has been a talking point for a while now. Everyone seems to think it's this big, complicated thing. And sure, there is some complexity to it. You don't want to be playing a 10-man rotation, for example. I think we agree the simple solution is to cut George Niang from the rotation altogether. As much as I think he seems like a great guy, he's funny, a fan favorite in that regard off the court, but on the floor, I'm not sure he has many people on his island anymore.
I would like to say that I think George Niang was a fan favorite in the preseason. I think the minute that the ball touched the hardwood, the fan favorite label has been stripped off. I have not seen a player be MF'd on Twitter more often outside of Jackson than George Niang. George Niang just is not getting any love from Cavs fans whatsoever, to the point that he even brought it up pretty much today in that like postal service meme that was going around for a little bit. But no, I am dumbfounded at this point that Niang gets minutes. I know the whole point is, and me and Tony, I feel like have beaten this dead horse when we talk about Niang, is like he has one trick, and the trick is that he shoots threes, and he's not even shooting the ball well. But at this point, you have so many other players that even if Dean Wade's not hitting a shot, the amount of other options, like other skills he brings to a floor is infinitely more than Niang. I don't know if JB feels because of the contract that he has to feel obligated to play someone. He's paying the money he's paying. Him and Dean have similar contracts. So, but I'm dumbfounded with Niang. I think, and for all the people that will be like, oh, well, Merrill needs to get out there too. But we can't because we play Niang. Merrill is an infinitely better shooter than Niang. He's a movement shooter. And if you want to argue that his defense gets in trouble sometimes because the Knicks did like for 3 straight possessions go at Sam Merrill, he pretty much neutralizes that as well by A, actually playing defense, and B, he generates 3-point attempts better than anyone on this roster.
I will say Hart is probably like one of the worst matchups for Merrill. I think we saw this in like the Clippers game where like Russell Westbrook was trying to bully him as well.
Yeah, like the bigger guards.
Like the 6'2", 6'3" bowling ball is not really something that Merrill can really like handle really well. But I think even like Hart, I think it was still completely fine because he was providing much on the offense.
I wanted to ask about Merrill's defense because the Knicks definitely made a point to target him. What did you guys think about? How did he hold up? Because to me, the eye test, like, sure, he was vulnerable, but I didn't think he was like breaking the defense in the way where you'd be like, oh, you can't play this guy in a playoff series. I think they could get him out there.
I think it was fine. One of the things that we really saw in the G League, and obviously the G League and NBA are very different. But when everyone wants to target Merrill because small white guy equals this guy obviously can't play defense. So one of the things that you really saw is that when teams would try to target him, it would really like slow down their entire process, kind of like a hack a Drummond where it's like, yeah, it works, but it's, like disrupts the flow. So by the time and Merrill does a good job of fighting through a lot of this and being in the right position and anticipating it, that by the time you try to get that mismatch, you've already wasted 16 seconds of the shot clock. And at that point, you're probably not getting a great shot off anyways. So I think that's one of the things that Merrill does well is he does a good job of switching, avoiding those switches, avoiding getting through screens well so that he's not in a position to be super vulnerable. And if he is, he's going to put up enough resistance where where the rotation can come, and he does a good job of running out of those rotations as well to find the open man that rotated over to cover up that weakness. So I think that a lot of those concerns are a little overblown, especially when you have a back line like the Cavs do that always relies heavily on rotating anyway, even if the defender's in the right spot, because it's not like, even when Okoro's guarding his guy, it's not like Mobley and Allen just kind of wall off their guy and just stay where they are. No, they still help. So I think that some of these Merrill defensive concerns are way overrated, especially with how much he's giving you offensively.
I agree with Jackson. I feel like people kind of look at the Merrill thing and they're expecting like that Merrill's going to be surrounded in the playoffs by like Garland and other defensive liabilities. Like JB isn't going to stack the lineup where the team is pretty much playing with 3 non-defenders and then maybe like Mobley, Allen, or Okoro in some variation. Like if Merrill's out there, they just have to have the defensive support for him on the floor as well. They wouldn't leave him on an island with, because like it's like the argument you make for Garland. Like no one's going to sit in the playoffs, but Garland holds his own in the postseason. We saw last year the Knicks were attacking him pretty much all the time. They were trying to find ways to hide Garland during the playoffs. Like they can do the same thing with Merrill if they really need to find. And he's proving he's just so much more valuable on the floor than just throwing him out in situational play. So it's just a case of how are you going to make it work come postseason time. Don't let this Knicks game just tell you like, yeah, no, I've seen enough from Merrill. Even though he led the team in scoring, I'm good.
One of the things that I will say with this whole rotation thing is that he doesn't need to take minutes from Niang, like even if we all agree he should. But like there's minutes to be had. There's 240 minutes in a basketball game. A lot of those are coming from the backcourt. Does Max Strus need to be playing 32 minutes a game? Does Karis LeVert need to be playing 25 minutes a game?
I think it's like 27. But that's the injuries throughout the year have kind of conflated a little bit. But I get
it's like does Darius Garland need to be playing as many minutes as he is? It's like I think those answers are all no. So it's like he doesn't need to. You don't need to like, oh, we're gonna give Merrill all of Niang's minutes, and now we don't have any power forwards. It's like no, there's plenty of guards that are in this rotation that Merrill is deserving of minutes of, and obviously I think this should be matchup dependent. Like I said, the Clippers game I thought was a very bad matchup for him because teams that can really switch everything on the perimeter really make it hard for movement shooters to be as effective. But how many Clippers are there out there? So I think this was a good example as to how effective somebody like Merrill can be, especially in an offense that was, what did they have? They had an 88 offensive rating with Merrill off the floor yesterday. So
yeah, it wasn't great.
Yeah. So,
I think what he brings to the offense definitely outweighs any defensive concerns to me, because I don't think he's just a complete negative on defense. I think he can fight to make himself at least not someone who's easy to pick on. And then when you add in how valuable he can be on offense, like I think it's just clear that he belongs in the rotation. I agree with your point that, like, sure, I don't think Niang should really be getting any more minutes. I would probably say Wade and Okoro should just exclusively be playing like wing minutes. Wade plays backup 4, Okoro's the backup 3, maybe even a backup 4 if you want to go small. And then those minutes between Strus and LeVert, you can find some space for Merrill in there. Like they don't need to play the amount of minutes they're playing. Certainly they're important in their own ways, but I think it's JB's job to figure it out. So,
and I did misspeak. They had an 81.6 offensive rating yesterday, so
a lot worse.
Not 88. Yeah.
How dare you? I think that what Merrill kind of pointed out to me was, I think how Merrill played yesterday was how they were expecting Strus to like expand this offense, the movement shooting aspect, because the way Merrill played last night was the way that we were kind of like throwing darts at the wall in the playoffs last year, hoping someone was just going to get hot and give him a 20-point game one night. And we were just kind of in the situation where we were crossing our fingers for like the Jetty type of performance to hit. And Merrill was proving exactly that's how it could be. But Strus, as it's been the whole year, except for the Dallas game where he went absolutely nuclear, has just been an up and down shooter pretty much the whole season. So I feel like it's definitely a valid case to remove minutes from Strus when he's not necessarily firing on all cylinders the way Merrill is.
And I do want to say that Strus has been good, so I don't want to. I feel like there's some people online who have been like, Strus has been a waste of money, and it's like, no, Strus has been
I
very
saw a
good.
tweet today. Sorry to interrupt. That said the Max Strus signing was significantly worse than the George Niang signing, and that was almost the last straw for me. I almost had to just deactivate Twitter because, like, I know Cavs Twitter can be a little outlandish sometimes, but like, guys, there's a line, okay? There's certain things that we don't have to argue about, so I didn't even quote tweet it. I wasn't going to give it the time of day, but I had to get it off my chest. That was crazy.
People just think that basketball is a one aspect sport. It's like you either shoot
Mm-hmm.
well or you don't, and that's it. And that's where the term like it's a make or miss league, I think, kind of strays people the wrong way, where they think if you can't score, you're just worthless. And Max Strus is like the embodiment of, hey, my shot's not falling, but I can contribute in so many different aspects that even though I'm going like 3 for 11 from the field, I'm still providing a ton of effort on the defensive end. And he's one of our best ball handlers with the bigs. Like he has chemistry with the two of them like no one else really outside of Garland and Mitchell have with this roster.
Strus is just a great reminder that the Cavs have like very few people on the roster who can pass, dribble, and shoot. So he's like one of 3, 4, maybe. So it's like, yeah, you know, that's like Strus isn't the problem here, guys.
Unless you want to throw Okoro in that list too. Maybe we got 5.
We don't want to do that yet.
Don't get ahead of ourselves.
Well, I think like the problem with Okoro is that he feels like he can't venture out of his little sandbox, and I think he could pass
more than last year, but he's still he's upgraded to a bigger sandbox.
Right.
It's all.
Like
big boy sandbox.
I'm really impressed with what I've seen from Okoro, but I still think there's like there's still more to this. So
I think the most telling thing about Okoro from that Knicks game yesterday was when the game came down to it. It didn't matter that Okoro played one of his best games of the year. The minute Garland cut to the basket, Okoro was as open as he ever was in that Knicks series last year. Like they did not care how well he was playing. They left him in his own zip code, and Garland didn't even look his way in those situations.
Well, I think the problem with that is more so Garland can't make that pass in a way that Donovan Mitchell can. So like
that's true.
It's very if you look at Garland's where his assists go, it's like 80% of them are 2-point field goals, which is why he gets all the turnovers, because it's really hard to fit the ball into some of the tight spaces that he tries to. He doesn't have the ability to get those passes out to Okoro or guys on the corner like Donovan can, so I think that's more so like that, maybe more so like the Knicks understanding Garland more than kind of not like the point remains. But I just want to say that there is something there with Garland not being able to make that pass too.
Yeah, those are both good points. I think the good thing is that Okoro did continue to shoot even when they started. They left him open for most of the game, but he made them pay, and he did start to draw them out a little bit throughout that first half, especially second half. They kind of just left him open, and he kept pulling. But he made 3 threes in that game, and throughout that entire Knicks series last year, he only made 4. So I think Okoro has definitely come a long way. I want to make one last point on the rotations, and then we're going to transition to talk about Darius Garland. But I want to get probably my biggest concern for the Cavs and JB Bickerstaff in particular when it comes to the rotations. I do not want to see a repeat of last year where we get to the playoffs. Very quickly, we realize, okay, all the rotations we had in the regular season, those are going out the window. Jetty, guess what? You're playing with the starters now. I know you only played 17 minutes with them all year. It was more than that, but you get the point.
It was like 32, I think.
Yeah, it was very low. I don't want to see him have to make that just where his hand is forced and he has to make a change. The only benefit this year is that, like, if Sam Merrill is forced to be out there, it won't be as bad as Danny Green being forced to be out there after not playing it all down the stretch, because Sam has actually had an opportunity to play with this team. I mean, for obvious reasons, it's better than Danny Green, but it would still just the principle of JB stubbornly sticking to his rotations and then being forced out of them in the first 2 games in the playoffs. That to me would be like instantly he's getting fired this offseason, regardless of how far they go in the playoffs, which if it goes that way, I would expect they're not going to make it too far in the playoffs. But hopefully that doesn't happen. That's my biggest concern with that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if the playoffs started today and the team was fully healthy, it would just be the same 8 basically that it was at the start of last year,
And
except
that
for
would
you have
scare
Max
me.
Strus, except for you have Max Strus in there now instead. And it's like I don't know if any of the lessons that needed to be learned, maybe they were learned, but but they're not going to be applied. So I don't know. I'm just really like, even I know the Knicks really know how to beat the Cavs in a way that, the Magic don't, just because they're not game planning for the Cavs the same way that the Knicks have. But if they played the Magic in the playoffs, what confidence do I have that the Magic, who are actually better suited to play the Knicks game plan, like what would make me think that the Cavs wouldn't, fall into the same traps against a team like the Magic, who's not good either, or even like a team like the Pacers, who are a very different team than that. I feel like they have the ability to press different buttons that would really hurt the Cavs, and I don't think that the Cavs right now are in a position where they're capable of making the changes necessary to counteract those.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah,
like
nice.
teams
No,
as
go
the
ahead.
season. Sorry, I feel like as teams as the season goes like towards the end, you see the checkered lineups and rotations usually get cut down. I feel like JB just doesn't subscribe to that theory whatsoever. I feel like we're kind of just seeing like he just plays it straight through, plays the starters way more minutes than they should, and then still somehow finds minutes for players like Niang, or last year like Niang, oh my god, Jetty, Lamar, those type of players that we know we're not going to really see unless it's a break glass in case of emergency type situation. And if that happens again for the second season in a row, I'm going to probably be very concerned, because it just means, like Tony said, we're going to like be in the first game of the season of the postseason and be like, oh wow, Niang played 20 minutes. That's kind of weird. That doesn't make sense. Oh, they attacked him the whole time. Well, hopefully by game 2 that changes.
Yeah, we can't see a repeat of that. It would just be the ultimate indicator for me that JB is not cut out for it. But hey, I guess the only thing left is to wait and see. I want to transition here and talk about Darius Garland, who probably pretty easily is having his worst season of the last 3 years, dating back to his breakout year. It's been a rough one for him. He's really been searching to get it together. The two things that he has struggled with, taking care of the ball and shooting efficiently, those are normally his strengths. He just hasn't really done it consistently this year. When you look at his impact on the offense, when Darius Garland's on the floor last season, the Cavs were in the 92nd percentile for net rating and the 89th percentile for offensive rating. This year, Darius Garland's on the court. The Cavs are just 79th percentile in net rating and the 53rd in offense, which is a huge plummet. Now, on the bright side, after a broken jaw and recovery, post All-Star break, Garland is averaging 19 points, 7 assists, and he's shooting almost 50% on 8 3-point attempts per game. He is turning it over fewer than 3 times per game during that stretch. To me, he clearly has a pep back in his step. He looks the most confident and effective that he has been this season, but there's still a lot of room for him to return to form. But things will look a whole lot better for the Cavs if he manages to do that. And I think Mitchell's growth as a playmaker this year is something that could really ensure that this duo will work. I think when Donovan Mitchell joined this team, we all knew that sacrifice was going to be required for Garland and Mitchell to make this pairing work. And maybe sacrifice isn't the right word, but I think Mitchell has held up his side of the deal on this because he needed to grow as a playmaker in order for this to work. The criticisms of Mitchell was that he was a little bit of a ball hog. He's very ball dominant, and he just didn't. He clearly had a talent for passing, but he just didn't do it the way that you would want him to. This year, that has changed. He's having the best playmaking season of his career. I don't know if you would consider him elite or where you would put him in that, but he has held up his end of the deal. For Garland, it's off-ball movement, and I want to make it clear because I saw people kind of saying this on Twitter. There's no doubt in my mind that Garland is a talented catch and shoot player. He can be a deadly off-ball threat. It's just he doesn't move without the ball as much as you would like, and that's his end of the deal that he hasn't been able to hold up. And that's one thing that, despite the way that it seems like he's turned a corner a little bit in terms of his shooting and getting his playmaking groove back, I haven't quite seen him move off the ball yet. And that's really the process that I'm still waiting on.
One thing I want to say is that I feel like there was one shot attempt in the Knicks game where he tried to do a movement shot where he tried to like come off a screen, catch it, and shoot it. It was at the top of the arc, and he looked really off balance. Like, it was in a way that you've seen Sam or like someone like Kyle Korver do these crazy shots where they're taking, coming off the screen and just rising up right away. But even when they're leaning, they're still on balance. And Darius wasn't. So I think that while I am the first one to criticize for his off-ball movement, I think that being a movement shooter is something that is a skill that's learned, and I don't think he's ever needed to learn that skill at any point in his career because he's very good at a lot of other things. So I think that's always fair to point out when we're talking about Garland, is that the things that Sam does and makes look easy are not actually easy.
Yeah, I feel like when I watch Garland, I feel like he's still, his biggest criticism has been that he's not as aggressive as he could be. And I feel like while his stats in the post All-Star break look better, I feel like the level of how passive he plays still kind of resonates through this stretch. I mean, in the third quarter of that Knicks game, he was borderline invisible on the floor. I just felt like he doesn't play.
Only one shot attempt when the Knicks were taking over the game. One shot attempt in that quarter.
It's just, there's some level to Garland that is just aggravating because we all know the level of player he can be. And I feel like even with the team changing their identity, he still finds a way to try to play his style within it. And it just breaks up way too much of the offensive system at this point, because now there's going to be like 11 players on this roster that are used to playing one way and one player who is just still stuck in the way of playing like, I'm going to try to poke and prod my way through this defense rather than just swing it, run off ball, get open off movement, rather than being like, let me dissect this one-on-one and see who bites so then I can swing it in a different direction. And I feel like that's been Garland since the jaw injury coming back. It just feels like he's in an awkward place, which makes sense because he was out while the team was thriving on a completely different system that they were in when he was like back in the rotation. But then you could argue Mobley looks better than he's ever looked in the Cavs offense in this very system that he adapted to pretty quickly. So it's just discouraging because Garland obviously is talented. He's trying. I feel like he is trying, but when you really squint at it, you can see that he's trying to make it work while trying to find ways to stick to the ways that he knows how to succeed in the NBA.
One of the things that I think this week has really showed is that Garland isn't a well-rounded enough ball handler and player to really be the focal point of a good offense, at least not right now. I think this week he did what everybody's wanted him to do. He's taken 9.8 threes in his last 4 games. He's knocking them down at a 54% clip, which is crazy. But in that same time, he's gone 5 for 28 inside the arc and 0 for 8 at the rim. So it's like you can't dominate the ball that much and not be able to really score inside the arc, or at least not score consistently. And I know he's gotten a lot of assists. He's gotten a lot of assists feeding, Mobley and Allen this week. In 4 games, 13 of his assists went to both of them. But he's still in the 36th percentile in turnovers this week. And this wasn't a week where we said, wow, Garland's turning it over like crazy. So he's still like, the trade-off between somebody who's turning it over that much and not finishing inside and not able to generate 3-point looks by attacking, it's just really tough to build a good offense around somebody like that. And I think that's, I think it's fair to say that if he didn't have the jaw injury, this isn't the player he would be, because he was finishing really good in the paint in the very beginning of the season. But this current version of Garland just isn't good enough to be the focal point of an offense the way that they need him to be. And that's why this 3-game stretch, at least without Mitchell, is probably not going to go well for him.
It's I feel like something people omit also when they talk about Garland struggling in the paint is that the dude lost like 15 pounds of muscle, which was the very muscle he built going into the regular season to handle contact around the rim. And now when you look at Garland visibly, even from like watching at home, I'm like, he looks like emaciated compared to the version we saw pre-jaw injury. So having him getting thrown and they're not getting training in, it's games constantly, no practice really. It's just you kind of rip and go. And this guy he just looks like if we saw Jackson go onto the floor, it had to go against NBA level centers. Like there's no chance anyone with that frame is going to be able to convert on anything unless they're completely open.
Right. Yeah. I think it's fair to criticize Garland, but also say that it's understandable. But like at this point, he's not the lead ball handler, the lead initiator, the lead focal point of an offense that a team that wants to be a good offense needs.
Those are really good points. I'm going to build on both of those. Corey, you said basically what I was going to say, which is Garland, the jaw injury, I know it seems like an excuse, but it really is a factor. When you looked at the previous however many games, he was having the best season of his career finishing in the paint. I think it was something like almost 10% better than his previous career best inside the 2-point range and around the rim. So he really was excelling in that department. I'm sure the jaw injury has been an effect of how poorly he has played the last few games finishing around the rim. He just looks like a different player. But to Jackson's point, I mean, as of right now, maybe he'll pick up all that weight again in the offseason and we'll see him return to whatever form he was at the beginning of the year. But who he is right now, this is probably how he's going to play for the rest of the season. And really the main point that I want to focus on is that he's never been that guy who you can focus the entire offense around. He's going to carry you through his scoring, even during his best. Well, I think last year was probably his best season, but even during his all-star season, he wasn't the guy who you could just dump the ball to and say, hey, go win us a game single-handedly with your scoring. That's why they traded for Donovan Mitchell. That's why they went out and got their guy. I know there's always that conversation of the Cavs traded too soon. Their championship window wasn't open yet. It's like, no. Donovan Mitchell, whatever championship window they have, it's Donovan Mitchell. He's the one who opens it up for them. They needed a guy of that caliber in order for this team to have a chance. Now, you could argue maybe they should have waited longer. Maybe they should have traded for someone else. But the reality is, Donovan Mitchell's a top 10 player in the NBA? Those guys aren't easy to get. They had an opportunity to get one. They pulled the trigger. And right now, all the pieces around him, it's just on them to adapt. And that's what we need to see Darius Garland do. That's what the rest of the season is going to be. It's really important down the stretch. I know the regular season doesn't matter and all that, but Darius Garland has to continue to work relentlessly to try and find a way to adapt to the new style this team is playing with, because he's a talented enough player to do it. All things considered, the way he's been playing, he's still talented enough to figure this out. And so it's important that they continue to take the rest of these games very serious.
I think that this stretch also shows how good he can be. Like, he has elite skills if he is ever able to unlock them fully, just because he's a 6'1" guard. How many 6'1" guards have ever been able to just kind of take their guys off the dribble consistently and finish in the paint and be the leader of a good offense?
Especially without explosive athleticism that he doesn't have.
Right. Like, there really hasn't been any guys in the league to really do that, So it's like, that's where he needs to develop his game more. But in this stretch without Mitchell, that's where it becomes really dicey, because you really need somebody like Harris LeVert to come back and step up, because there's just not a whole lot of, playmakers on this team. We saw, I think Greg Porter Jr. had his best run in probably since like November last game, but it still wasn't like great. It wasn't like, anything that was gonna like change games. So, they're just in a tough spot, and it's not a good time to be facing a team like the Celtics, who can switch really easily and is probably gonna make it a really tough game for Merrill, and then also play a team like the Timberwolves that have length at every single position. That is also not going to be really easy for Garland. So, this is going to be a really, really tough stretch.
I think this is a good reminder, going back to the Donovan Mitchell trade point, that when the Mitchell trade happened, it kind of established a hierarchy, and no one was thinking that this was going to be like Garland's the difference maker for this Cavs team. It automatically became like this Cavs team will go where it needs to go if Mobley gets to a certain point where he can get into like the top 15 player conversation. I think Garland, we realized throughout his All-Star year, they were like, we know what the plateau of Garland kind of looks like, unless he takes like some otherworldly leap that none of us foresaw. I think it's kind of showing how Garland to this Cavs team can play. His like way of succeeding next to Donovan Mitchell is the way that Mike Conley did with the Jazz as well. Like if Garland can play in that Mike Conley mold for this Cavs team where he's not looking to take over games, but looking to support Mitchell more than being like your turn, my turn kind of ordeal, then this is, but obviously like Garland is better than that version of Mike Conley, but just like the archetype of what Conley was to those Jazz teams and even to the Grizzlies teams, like that type of player is what I see Garland being for the Cavs going forward. And the games like last night kind of remind me that that's like where his ceiling is for me, at least.
Yeah, I think that's a good archetype. I think that's a decent blueprint. He could kind of be that version of Mike Conley on steroids when he's playing at his best. So I think the Cavs have a lot of work to do. We'll leave it at that. Does anyone have any final words before we enter this week from hell with the Cavs playing a whole bunch of really good teams without Donovan Mitchell and bad vibes going on?
Say get ready for the 4th seed, guys.
we held on the third for a while.
The power of friendship can bring it home. That's what I'm hoping. Craig Porter, Sam Merrill, save us. Emoni Bates time.
Well, it was Donovan and the power of friendship. Listen,
I know.
I hope Emoni does well if he plays. That's all.
I agree. Go Cavs. That's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. I want to thank everyone for watching and listening. Forgot to mention at the top, but if you want to be in our Twitter group chat, which is just thriving right now, with just a lot of activity going on in there, all you have to do is subscribe. Yeah, a lot of angst.
Doomsday preppers
on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Send me proof and I'll get you added. Thanks again for watching and go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, I'm sorry everyone yelled at you for your 2 big lineup takes. You were right.